It's my great pleasure as the current chair of the School of Ecumenics Trust to welcome you all to this latest in the series of webinars, which has been organised to mark and celebrate the 50th anniversary of the establishment of ISE. It's a format which has enabled distinguished contributors and a significant number of participants to reflect on the progress made over the last 50 years in terms of the institution which arose from Michael Hurley's vision, the perspective which he brought to bear on issues, the combination of scholarship and activism, which was at the heart of his ecumenical vision, and to consider some of the core questions which motivated his initiative and which in many ways have guided the development of the institution which he established. It has moved on physically and otherwise as an academic institution. It's been involved in different ways in civil society action, in the work of the churches and in wider civil society. So these webinars have given us an opportunity to reflect, but also to be inspired to move on from the contributions of people who in many ways are critical to the mission which Michael Hurley articulated and which in many ways we continue to follow. So it's a great pleasure for me to hand over now to our chair for this evening's webinar, Andrew Pearce, who will introduce our speakers and keep us to time, I'm sure, as we proceed. Andrew.
Thank you, Dermot, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to this important seminar. As the subtitle of tonight's seminar suggests, the reputation of Ireland and religion and Christianity is not always entirely an immediate recollection of the land of saints and scholars, because Christian identity here has become very complicated through the dynamics of things like settler colonialism, migration, immigration, and all the other factors that have been addressed in some of the previous seminars on the topics of peace and reconciliation in Ireland. Our topic tonight connects the quest for peace, for just peace, with the question of ecumenism and ecumenical relations. And the panelists we've gathered reflect a good cross-section of the kinds of activity that the quest for ecumenism and the quest for just peace bring in. We've academics, we've administrators, we've people whose role is primarily pastoral, and we've people who in all sorts of interesting ways cross those borders on a repeated basis. Our guests, you'll see, are Professor Siobhan Garrigan, Dr. Nicola Brady, Tim Kinahan, Cheryl Neben, and Tom Layden. And I'll be introducing each one of them in more detail before they speak. And our first speaker then this evening is Dr. Siobhan Garrigan, who is the Loyola Professor of Catholic Theology and head of the School of Religion, Theology and Peace Studies in Trinity College, Dublin, which is where the Irish School of Ecumenics is now located. Having studied in Oxford and then New York, Siobhan obtained her doctorate in 2001 from the Milltown Institute of Philosophy and Theology in Dublin. Before returning to Dublin in a professional and a professorial capacity in 2014, she worked with the Open University in Belfast, in Yale, and in the University of Exeter. Her published work is in the area of liturgical scholarship, but that's a very minor way of saying it. Sounds like I'm fencing her in, because her view of liturgical scholarship reaches widely. The first book in this series, the Beyond Ritual, Sacramental Theology After Habermas, which was published in 2004, was a good examination of how liturgical practice may sometimes frustrate efforts to communicate more openly and inclusively. And in 2010, she published the book that many people here will have read, The Real Peace Process, an exploration of how Irish churches are often remarkably competent at creating good Catholics and good Protestants, but struggle sometimes to create people who might have something more in common than that. Siobhan, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for the lovely introduction. And hello, everybody. It's an absolute privilege to be invited to be here tonight. Thank you, Jin, very much for inviting me. And thank you everybody for this whole series and for being here tonight. So I was struck, going back to the book that has given the title for our discussion tonight, by how Robin Boyd felt it was really quite important to give over a large chunk of the book to context. Andrew's already referenced the Saints and Scholars section and the critique that Boyd begins with. And so at the risk of repeating things, and don't worry, this won't last very long, I just want to give a few updates in context, because for a book that was written that was asking the question, is Christianity discredited here? Or is this bearing witness to Pilgrim's progress, or as he comes to at the end, prophetic progress? It was written in 1988. And of course, a lot has happened since then. I'm not intending to be comprehensive, but four quick things to point out. Since 1988, we have become a net receiver, not giver, of migrants. There's a lot that could be said about that and about what's about to happen. But the point I'd like to make this for tonight is that with these migrants, many more faiths or expressions of faith came than we were habitually used to receiving, or in greater numbers than would have been here in 1988. And this has recontextualized these questions of ecumenical engagement, because it has made us engage in interfaith dialogue. So ecumenical dialogue no longer happens except in a context also of interfaith dialogue. Secondly, this week's prosecution of David Holden and the British government saying that they would like if there weren't any more such prosecutions of historic offences, allegations, reminds us of all the huge unfinished business, the historic wounds yet to be addressed, the ongoing of progress in a promised commission to address them, the lack of progress on symbols and other, and particularly on flags, the Irish Language Act in Northern Ireland. These are the three main issues, but they bespeak so many lives that are caught in an unresolved, long promised context, which is not atomized to the north, but which is our context, because our context is asking Christians to reconcile, big word, without the political work that's needed for them to have an identity in these cultures on this island. I dare to mention it, but only briefly. The context is also one of Brexit. This radically affects the three-way relationship between Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. And although I won't say anything directly about that, in what follows, it's very important that it's there. Fourthly, the census in the Republic is coming up this Sunday, and we expect it will show even more showed the last time, which is a significant decline in participation in Christian church attendance. Now, this is very different. As you might remember, Boyd begins by noting how extraordinary Ireland is in the amount of people who actually attend church, engage weekly in communities of Christian expression on this island. It seems strange now to read a book from 1988 and to know what was going on at the time, and to realize that it didn't, like all books of that era, mention the clerical sexual abuse and the cover-ups of it that we know were almost endemic at this time, but which were only unearthed, exposed, stopped being denied in the years that follow. And of course, for our question tonight, we know that failing church attendance, well, that's the wrong word, excuse me, declining a church attendance in traditional forms of Christianity is a result of many factors. But I think in our particular context, we have to name the pain and the lack of trust that was caused by this particular set of crimes and the crisis that ensued in our context. So if we have fewer church attenders, does this help or hinder in pursuing what Boyd phrased as koinonia, and I'm going to borrow his phrase, on this island? And because my work, as Andrew said, so far in my working life has proceeded largely through studying worship, whether that's organizing ecumenical worship myself with others, or for the book Andrew kindly mentioned, The Real Peace Process. Because of that, I'm going to structure my remarks around some recent observations of worship. I'll start with the Greystone Eco Congregations Award I saw tucked into the old baptistry in a nonconformist church. The perfect place, I thought, because this is where everything has to start nowadays, combating the climate catastrophe. Eco Congregations has been a fantastic cross-denominational project. But if we're looking for challenges and opportunities, then I think there's an opportunity here. I think there's an opportunity screaming out for more cross-community engagement, driven by the urgency, helped, prompted, fueled, motivated by the urgency of ecological attention. Secondly, in a Church of Ireland church that I attended very recently for a funeral, I arrived early and was seated near the front by the ushers, which I hate, but there we go. And because I was at the front, I witnessed the vicar being approached by a Roman Catholic priest who said, "Oh, can I sit in on this?" And the vicar said nothing. And the Roman Catholic priest said, "Well, the lady who's being buried was, of course, married to a Catholic and Catholic children, and I've known them all their lives." And the vicar said nothing. And this really got my attention. And then I saw the vicar, maybe I missed something, but I heard her say a word. And I then saw her signal to the vestry, and the priest went and changed. And he sat in the sanctuary over to the very edge of it. And he was not asked, he wasn't introduced, he wasn't welcomed, he wasn't asked to say a prayer, he wasn't even given some water to asperge something at the very end. And it was a missed opportunity, but one that I think perhaps invites us to deeper consideration of what's going on there. And one thought that occurs to me is that it is, first of all, it's at a profoundly local level that koinonia is accomplished or not. And perhaps we're so worn down by waiting for the Faith and Order Commission to come with something that has trickle-down effect, or for an instruction on what to do in these circumstances that needs iterated or recreated for our new context. But I would say that these were both really good people struggling to figure something out in the moment. And the challenge is not to overlook what can be done, which I would argue is so much, while waiting for guidance. We need to create ritual agency in the people who are actually living this out. Big challenge. At the same time, we are facing challenges that seem only to be able to be solved from elsewhere, or that seem to be caused by elsewhere. And at a Catholic Mass a couple of months ago, I found myself once again tripping up over the new words, which of course are 11 years old at this stage. As you may know, and this is my own take on the situation. This does not represent anyone's take but my own. Pope Benedict ordered a retranslation of the Roman Rite into vernaculars to make it deliberately less aligned with Protestant liturgical language. And the denominations with prayer books or books of order for worship, it's very obvious that they have, since Vatican II, aligned to an absolutely glorious extent with various translations of the Old Roman Rite, ever more progressing toward common understandings in language. And with this move, Benedict, I think, created an act of violence against koinonia that has set ecumenism back. Now, he said it was under the guise of, my word, he would say, it was in order to give a better translation of the Latin. But I can post in the chat, if you like, various articles from really good scholars who have shown that it is not a better translation of the Latin. In some cases, it's not a translation of the Latin at all. It is an enforcement of a Catholic aesthetic and of a imagination of authority onto what was becoming a much more shared language. Why does this matter? Isn't this an inter-Catholic debate? Go off and have it with other academics. No, it matters. It matters a lot, because although koinonia, of course, happens largely through bodies in spaces where we experience God's presence being us and together, and ideally in one another, although it may take some reflection to come to that point. Words are not the main thing. Words are totally subsidiary to the body and its multiple forms of symbolization. As Jung said, 93% communication is non-verbal. We're dealing with the 7%, but the 7%, I think, really, really matter. Those words really matter, because in this context, the words are often the first point of recognizing our connections, of going, you've got a cup, we've got a cup, you share the cup. You take and bless and break the bread. You take and bless and share this cup. Well, you don't do that if you have to call it a chalice. It takes away that common language. So not having shared language is a real challenge in that primary liturgical experience that people have every week. Of course, that primary liturgical experience that people, or worship experience, I don't mean that you have to be liturgically practicing to have this Sunday gathering experience. It can be in the spirit and free form, but that worship experience that happens on Sunday may be primary, but there are so many other ways in which we can discern challenge and opportunity in what goes on with people in faith on this island today. And thanks to COVID, I became a lot more aware of the elderly people around me. And even though the restrictions are ending, I'm still involved, as I never was before, with the secular social services organisation here in West Mayo. And I was there last Friday, and at a certain point after a meal, a lunch and a sing-song, one of the people said, "Oh, we haven't said a prayer yet." And 20 people started praying. They said, Lord Father. They went into a free-form sort of prayer. And I wondered, given that they're all over 70, what will I and my colleagues, what will my nieces and their colleagues and friends do when they're older? The challenge is, okay, fewer people are going to church, but what do we give them? What do we inculcate? Is it song? Is it the bell of the Angelus? Is it some gesture that lets us know what to do when we're in the nursing home in time to come? That is across the backgrounds that we come from.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. It's really thrown down the all sorts of interesting questions as to how we connect koinonia with context, this very cuddly, big ecumenical word, and the rough and ready world of our experience. Thank you very much indeed. Our second contributor is Dr. Nicola Brady, who is the General Secretary of Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, the CTBI. And before taking on this role, between 2016 and 2021, Nicola was the General Secretary of the Irish Council of Churches. And in the 8 years before that, she'd worked as the research coordinator of the Irish Catholic Bishops' Council for Justice and Peace. Her work has focused on faith-engaged peace building, both on the island of Ireland and internationally. She's an Eisenhower Fellow and a Director of Christian Aid Ireland and of the Maximilian Kolbe Foundation, which works to extend the lessons of post-World War II German-Polish reconciliation to other conflict areas. She's currently chairing the steering committee for the National Synodal Pathway for the Catholic Church in Ireland. Nicola, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jen. Hello, everybody. I'm really grateful for the invitation. I know this webinar has been planned for some time and the theme was chosen quite some time ago, but sadly, it has turned out to be a really timely conversation. As we've seen from recent events in the tone of some of the election debate here, it's reminded us just how fragile our peace still is in many respects. And so it's a time when we all have to think about how best we can make our contribution to the work of peace, and to do this in a context of multiple other pressures from the local level to the global, whether it's the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, the invasion of Ukraine, the climate crisis, to name but a few. So as Andrew mentioned in the introduction, I've been involved in interchurch peace building work for over a decade. So I've encountered plenty of challenges during that time. So I'm going to restrict myself to a few key challenges and a few thoughts coming out of that experience for the next few minutes. The first thing I would want to say is that I feel that the churches have a significant role to play in terms of the work of peace and reconciliation, and could be doing much more with the assets that they have. They have networks that go from the local level through to the global. They have resources in scripture that provide language and approaches to support the work of reconciliation and healing for people of Christian faith. And that in turn can form the basis for a respectful dialogue with those who aren't Christian. Churches are important centres of community for many people, and faith continues to shape people's lives in important ways. There's much more that we could be doing to develop that capacity in relation to leadership, communication, practical responses, and the church's overall investment in this area. So I hope that that's something that we'll be developing throughout the course of our conversation this evening. A major change over the course of the time that I've been involved in this work even is that where churches and individual denominations previously had what we could describe as a privileged place in terms of the coverage of their public pronouncements, access to decision makers, this has been increasingly challenged with secularization, and alongside that, a greater recognition of diversity in society. Some may see this as a negative development for churches, but in my experience, it's helped to ensure that churches do a lot more listening, that there's more speaking together and more working in partnership with others beyond the churches. There's also, in my experience, a growing recognition that divisions between Christians are not only harmful for the church and for the credibility of the Christian message, but that this fragmentation also weakens the Christian response to the needs of the surrounding community because efforts and resources are divided. As one church leader put it to me recently, we need to be more courageous in facing up to the consequences of our fractured fellowship. Another significant divide in the church context is the generational divide. Many young people are simply not present. They see the church as not being relevant, or they try to get involved, but then they get the message that there are no leadership opportunities available to them, at least not without a long wait. And so they take their energy and their talents elsewhere. And then young people who choose to stay involved in the church can often face a further challenge in the form of an older generation that is understandably disappointed at the lack of the progress that we've made, whether it's in the work of peace and reconciliation, ecumenical relations, the work of social justice, but then is not able to bring that message of encouragement to the younger generation to help them get involved and support their leadership. On a much more optimistic note, I would point out that a number of years back in the Irish Interchurch meeting, we introduced a youth panel as part of the proceedings to ensure that younger leaders would have the opportunity to speak and on their terms. And that was incredibly powerful. The younger leaders really challenged the dominant narratives with their honesty and with the fresh perspectives that they brought to this. Following on from that, I would say that churches have been slow to acknowledge the failings of the past, and there's still some resistance to this, particularly from people who have legitimate concerns that such acknowledgements will result in the conflict being misrepresented as being purely about religion, or that the positive contribution and leadership of churches will be eclipsed by this focus on the failings with a negative impact on the morale of our church communities when that's already something of a struggle. But acknowledgement has a very important and powerful role in the process of reconciliation. Churches are not the only institutions, not the only leaders in society that need to engage in this kind of critical self-reflection, but they should not be afraid to take that lead and encourage others to follow. And lastly, I would say that there have been some encouraging developments in recent years in some of the initiatives undertaken jointly by senior church leaders around Brexit, political instability, centenaries, and the wider response to these initiatives, both within the churches and beyond. So we've seen where church leaders, by coming together, are creating a space that is truly cross-community and offering that with humility to others, have been met with a positive response and have been able to create some safe space for dialogue. But there's a lot more work to be done to connect that to the level of the local congregations. And I think this has to be a priority focus as we look to the future. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, Nicola. That was very, very interesting indeed. We're going to power on to our next speaker. And that's the Reverend Cheryl Medvan, who joins us clearly from the Belfast campus of Ulster University, with some beautiful product placement of Coca-Cola as well, which is we're clearly getting down with the youth here. Thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl is a Presbyterian minister and a chaplain at Ulster University and a member of the Corrymeela community. She's a regular contributor to Thought for the Day, and in a remarkable contribution in 2021, following the murder of Sarah Everard, her Thought for the Day generated quite a degree of coverage, generated a great deal of comment. And what was striking was how she had managed to connect much of the public mood with a great deal of steering to question prevailing attitudes that allowed violence to be perpetrated in the way that it had been at the time. And it was some of the most interesting and thought-provoking public commentary around this question of violence and gender that had made it into the public press for a long time. It was a wonderful achievement. Cheryl, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you. It's a huge privilege, and I have to say really daunting to be here. Anyone that doesn't know me, this is not my normal get-up, okay? I have to explain. Ulster University have today installed a new chancellor, Colin Davidson, the artist of Silent Witness fame, if you've seen the Silent Witness art exhibition that gives voice, in a sense, to people who are victims and forgotten, people who paid the cost of the Troubles and have paid the cost of the peace. And so he's become our new chancellor today. About 13 years ago, we installed our previous chancellor, Jimmy Nesbitt, and Father Alan McGuckin, now Bishop McGuckin, who was my colleague at the time. The two of us drove up to Coleraine while I drove, and while I was driving, he taught me the Our Father in Irish. And it has been carried with me a sense of how we need to learn to speak each other's language, how we need to spend time together, just be together, go places together, do stuff together. I'm no expert on anything ecumenical because, let me tell you a little bit of my background. I come from the Brethren. So kind of very, very narrow evangelical grouping that wouldn't have considered anything to do with the Catholic Church, or indeed probably the Church of Ireland, to be something that we wanted to mix with. We might have mixed with, you know, tolerated the Baptists maybe. So that's my earliest childhood, was from that background. So ecumenism, as I was growing up, I was born at the beginning of the Troubles, and ecumenism was the E word. It was the selling out of faith to people who were grabbing the, we would have said, taking the form of religion but denying its power. And we had that kind of arrogant view of who we were and how right we were and how wrong everybody else was. But I'm telling you this because there are people like me still out there, people who wouldn't tolerate a female wearing one of these, for a start, or probably anybody wearing one of these. So there's lots of Christians on this island who probably never join anything that has the word ecumenism in the title. And I guess I felt it might be my place to be that voice today. But I grew up with a deep love of Jesus and of scripture, and would have been in my teens when John chapter 17 hit home to me, and I realized that when in the words that are given to us in John chapter 17 in the prayer of Jesus, and he says, unless they will be one, and people will know that I came from you when they love each other. And this idea that people who own the name of Christ ought to love and respect each other. I mean, really not rocket science, but it was rocket science to me because of where I came from. And so I'm on this long journey to unpack this. And I went off doing evangelism, because evangelism was the E word that we were keen on. It was about making people believe the stuff that we believed in the way that we did, using the words that we use, not me learning to pray Our Father in Irish. You know, all the opposite of bringing people to my territory. So I went and lived in France, learned to be foreign, learned to speak somebody else's language, adopt other people's culture, accept that my way was not the only way. Discovered in the student groups that I was working in there that often the people like me, the evangelical Protestants, had the views that were most like the Pharisees, while the occasional Catholic student who would be a part of our conversations would often give the humblest, most thoughtful, most reflective, and I thought most Christ-like views. So for me, that was a big opener of my mind to understanding that the gospel was bigger than I had thought. When I came back from France, I came to Union with the hope that the church might be good news rather than continuing to be an excuse for the divisions on this island. I had so many French people saying to me, what are you doing being a kind of a missionary here when people in Ireland are killing each other over Catholic and Protestant? And I knew it wasn't that simple, but still, I did feel that the churches were still part of that polarization. So I came back. The Presbyterian Church accepted my candidacy and let me come and study. And when I came back, Father Ted had been popular, and my friend said, you've got to see Father Ted because that's an important part of the culture. And of course, one of the key phrases that still lives on from Father Ted is, that would be an ecumenical matter. And what did that mean? It meant it's nothing to do with us. It's above my pay grade. and it's too highfalutin and too complicated for us, and it's not what we're really about. And that, I think this resonates a bit with what Siobhan's saying about the importance of the local and relationships on the local level being where real ecumenism happens. But it was just a joke, you know, and Father Ted was very much a joke, and it's quite horrific now. If you watch Father Ted now, all these years later, has anybody watched them recently? It's real cringeworthy stuff, because of how we have understood the arrogance of ourselves as the church. Because as Siobhan said, there's the whole abuse of clerical power that means that people don't want to listen to the church. They don't value what we have to say. And this is not just the Catholic Church. The Presbyterian Church has certainly alienated plenty of people through our attitudes towards LGBTQIA. Also with our unquestioning and unnuanced attitudes towards both end of life and start of life issues, and the complexity of women's lives. And in fact, we're very unreflective about anything to do with the word patriarchy. And that gives us huge challenges, because the world that I function in is very comfortable talking about patriarchy and where we see it in the university. And that's generations of people who are being educated and going out into the world and finding that the church is frequently not capable of reflecting on how our use of power and abuse of power has built conflicting empires that find it hard to be in relationship with each other. We're playing games of chess at certain levels within our denominations, and that can happen at local level as well as at top levels, but it's making it difficult for ordinary human beings to say, do you know, where's the truth in this? Do you people really believe what you say you believe? I have a PowerPoint, which I'm not going to show you, but basically I've resumed the challenges that I see, which are very unsophisticated. And I think you'll recognize these: our own self-importance and arrogance, the fact that we've lost people's ear and their trust and their interest over patriarchy, over LGBT. These things mean that people don't care whether the church is ecumenical or not. They don't care whether what the churches do. It just isn't relevant to them. They've dismissed us as having nothing to contribute, and we need to take account of that. We've been distracted by events often, whether COVID or the latest war, or, you know, we very quickly forget what we've learned in the past. Where there were groups of churches locally who were functioning proactively to keep relationships during the Troubles, the next generation comes along and doesn't see how important it is. Church institutions, synods and general assemblies no longer keep that at the top of our agenda, no longer think in terms of how are we building relationships together. So it's not seen, our ecumenical relationships aren't seen as the height of our importance when we're talking about, say, health or education or, you know, other matters. So the church, we're losing our voice in every place because we've lost our capacity to remember what we learned in the past and what we offered that was constructive in the past. Part of the challenge for us is the dynamics of human systems of belonging. I think we just do have to accept that these dysfunctional ways that we are, and this speed with which we lose what we've already learned, is just part of life and society. But at least we should recognize that it's a challenge and think about how we're going to address it. I think there's a big challenge for us, as I said earlier, that people do not see us believing what we say we believe in. We say we believe in a God who is Lord of all, creator of all, who loves the world so much that God identifies intimately with us in order to redeem us. And so But instead of that, what do we do as a church? We focus on sin, we focus on marginalizing people, we focus on deciding who's in and who's out, we focus on correcting each other's theology, rather than on building relationship, which would be the agenda that is God's agenda. And yeah, so my fifth challenge that I have on my list is that we play too easily into narratives of fear, a bit like we're seeing in the rest of society. I've seen it described as Russification recently. I don't think the Russians really have a monopoly on this. It certainly ties into all sorts of other stuff. Thanks, Andrew. I'm finishing. But those narratives of fear, surely the Christian church has something better to offer than fear. Do we not know perfect love, which casts out fear, which means that we don't have to defend our own territory, and we have capacity to build relationship in the name of Christ?
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I'm sorry I bounced you in there ahead of Tim.
You did. I'm
really sorry. That was most appalling of me. Tim Kinahan is our next speaker, who is a Church of Ireland priest and the rector of St. John the Baptist Church in Helens Bay. Tim's involvement in issues around peace and justice in relation to particularly the role of churches in these matters goes back a long way. He was a member of the Community Relations Council, Northern Ireland, a member of the Faith and Politics group, indeed being chair of it, and has contributed a number of works of thoughtful reflection on issues that are facing the churches. He's published A Deep and Dazzling Darkness, a Christian theology of interfaith perspective, A More Excellent Way, a vision for Northern Ireland, Where Do We Go From Here, Protestants and the Future of Northern Ireland. And very recently, he and his friend Brian Lennon, SJ, have published Does Christ Matter? A dialogue between an Anglican and a Jesuit minister, written with between a Jesuit and an Anglican. One of the nicer things about Tim, of course, is the fact that he's somebody who has in the past been hijacked, because we haven't had enough people who've been hijacked appearing in our panels. Tim, you're very, very welcome.
Right. Yes, well, thank you very much, sir. Like one of the other contributors, I wondered why in the heck Andrew asked me to come along today. I have, as he said, in the past been very involved in sort of wider church things, but really for the last 30 years, I've been much more parish-based, and that's going to be my perspective today. The hints that Andrew gave me when he persuaded me and he twisted my arm was that I'm going to start on a fairly negative things. What are the challenges, but also the weaknesses about the church at a local level? And in some ways, these weaknesses are the flip side of strengths. Firstly, I think most parishes, and certainly my own experience is in suburban Belfast and now in the last 16 years here in a fairly prosperous commuter village outside in between Bangor and Hollywood. The churches, by and large, are fairly parochial. They're not really interested in the wider church. They have nothing against them. They have nothing against, or my congregations have nothing against ecumenism, but it just doesn't seem to sort of cross their threshold. And if that is the case, and again in the last two parishes, I have sounded out local Catholic churches, but they're not local enough. They're geographically distant and they have more natural ecumenical partners. And anywhere, they tend to be a bit drowned out by well-meaning liberal Protestants. So there has been very little in that sort of personal contact that has been able to develop in either of my last two parishes. I think again, I speak from my own Church of Ireland experience, there is a sense of being comfortable. And comfortable is where we are. And for some people that involves playing along, playing catch up with secular society. For others, it means damn well doing the exact opposite to that and quite frankly refusing to do anything that might be viewed as playing catch up with secular society. There are serious divisions within the churches, and I think these are as much within denominations as between denominations. And they've already been alluded to as the questions of human sexuality, interpretation of Holy Scripture, and within Anglicanism, that is perhaps best example with the GAFCON, the Global Anglican Futures Conference, which would be very traditional, very biblical in its outlook. The tendency there, again, with all parties to be, I'm right, you're wrong. There's truth and there's error, and I'm on the side of truth. That on the whole doesn't impinge very much on the local congregations. And indeed, where clergy take a stand, for instance, I heard fairly recently of a Church of Ireland clergyman who got into a new parish and withdrew from, there was a regular ecumenical walk on Good Friday, which went between the churches, including the Catholic Church. And this new rector came in and said, I'm not doing it because the Catholics are involved. But most of his congregation didn't support it. They were uncomfortable with that. So I think a lot of where there is narrowness, where there is a confrontational tendency, it tends to be as much between the clergy and the church leaders as it is the general congregation. General congregations are theologically uninformed, despite my superb preaching. They're not really interested, actually, in the details. They're going to tend to leave that to the professionals, the clergy, the people in the pulpit, despite the fact that most clergy are stuck theologically in what we did at theological college. Very few clergy keep up to date with current trends in theology, and I'm as guilty as the next person. There are problems, again, at a local level, where some churches will seem to abandon tradition, throwing it out, and that, of course, causes problems. It's very noticeable in this area that some churches sort of abandon prayer books and losing, obviously in the attempt to encourage young people, encourage a new generation. It hasn't entirely worked, but the older generation, the more traditionally minded, vote with their feet and go to neighboring parishes which still are more traditional. So that is a division again between tradition and attempts to modernize the way the message is communicated. I remember one time going to pick up the kids outside the primary school up in Gilnahirk, and standing there, just crossed my mind looking at the people, very few whom their parents were churchgoers, and just getting that feeling that I represented an anachronistic irrelevance. What the church didn't impact on their lives at all. The kids may have gone to youth organizations, but that was the height of it. And much more recently, I advertised the fact that the church was always open for those who might like to pray for Ukraine. And somebody put a message up online that it was a nice gesture. It was rather dismissive. Again, church was not relevant. I think the usual things which we did for years and certainly had a frisson during the height of the Troubles, you know, the octave of unity, things the churches sharing worship together, they just don't have the same frisson of danger as they did 30 years ago. They're tired. People tend to come to them because they want to support the rector. There's a sense amongst many of defeatism. A colleague of mine said, we're a dying institution. And I don't think he's entirely right, but I see exactly where he's coming from. How you break the cycle of a priest-ridden church, a comfortable church, sometimes a church that is too busy, that's a challenge I think we all face. It's an ecumenical challenge, but it is also a challenge within our own denominations. So I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, you seem to have gone with the challenges quite nicely there. Thank you very much. Our final panelist of our group of contributors in the discussion is Father Tom Layden, who is the Irish province's coordinator of ecumenism and a former provincial of the Jesuit order in Ireland. Obviously, the Irish School of Ecumenics owes a very great debt to the Irish province of the Jesuits for their support of Father Michael Hurley, and not just for Michael, but also for the school, because probably without the Jesuit order, there wouldn't have been an Irish School of Ecumenics, maybe initially, but certainly not over subsequent decades. And that has been support that is greatly valued. And in turn, because of that support, Tom would have been involved intimately in the running of the Irish School of Ecumenics through the Academic Council for Research, which he chaired for a number of years. Those of us who know Tom know him to be a superb communicator and very actively involved in cross-community work, particularly in and around Belfast. But when I say a superb communicator, sometimes that sounds like I'm praising something more technocratic. Anyone who looks at the Jesuit pages of their splendid website will see Tom at work as a superb communicator, capable of bringing people out over very deep and difficult waters, which is not something that a lot of people can do via the medium of the web. Tom, we're delighted to have you contributing to this.
So good evening, everybody. Christianity Discredited or Pilgrim's Progress. What a wonderful title that Robin Boyd came up for his book on Ireland in 1988. And it's a wonderful title for us in our discussion and reflections this evening. I think Michael Hurley, the first director of the school, would have liked it and would have wanted us to give equal attention to both the Christianity Discredited and the Pilgrim's Progress part. It seems to me that it's not a question of Christianity Discredited or Pilgrim's Progress. It's a question of Christianity Discredited and Pilgrim's Progress, because we have made mistakes along the way in the ecumenical movement. I see myself as a minor player in it, but also there have been times when there has been a fruitfulness to our project and we've been able to make progress. In terms of just peace on the island of Ireland, those involved in ecumenism are an obvious group to make a contribution, because we have had and continue to have certain structures for conversation and listening. We will know things like Ballymascanlon meetings, the Glenstole conferences, ISE conferences, Corrymeela meetings, local clergy and church worker gatherings. Actually, I was saying to Andrew when I was speaking to him the other evening at an event in Trinity that I often notice here in Belfast when I go to various events that are of an interchurch or cross-community nature, I meet the same people at different meetings. Mind you, occasionally one or two kind of new faces. But I sometimes think to myself that there may well be other meetings going on elsewhere in the city of Belfast and throughout Northern Ireland, where people who have a more single identity, a more their own community view of life, also meet with each other. And maybe the challenge is how these groups can begin to have some kind of contact going into the future. We also have the advantage that our meetings are regular. The emphasis and the participation is not just local, it's international. And thankfully, ecumenical work and contact in recent years, especially since the 1980s, now has more involvement in working class areas and with the concerns of working class people, although it tends to be seen as mainly middle class. But there are certain dangers and challenges, as well as the advantages we have in our structures. There's the danger of the conversation staying on a certain level, avoiding the asking of difficult questions, the temptation to be overly polite, to avoid giving offense. We need to ask ourselves, who is missing from our meetings? Whose voice is not being heard? Which perspective is not being expressed? Yes, humanists have played their part in creating, sustaining, and developing the just peace in the past and now. But we have to realize that we're not the only players. Other people have a part to play in contributing to just peace, including politicians, civil servants, community workers, local activists, academics, trade unionists, non-governmental organizations, voluntary sector workers, and many others. And not all of these are part of the ecumenical movement. Some of them might even be conscientious objectors to the ecumenical project, seeing it as a threat to theological truth as they perceive it. We're not the only ones on the scene, important to graciously and honestly acknowledge the contribution of others. The truth also is that on this island, none of us has clean hands. We are all part of the problem that expressed itself in injustice and violence in the past, and there are still shades of that in the present. We all bear some responsibility. We are part of the problem, and we are affected by bias that limits our vision. Maybe our contribution has been more in the area of what we didn't do, what we didn't notice and observe, rather than what we did. But all the time, the call, an invitation to us, if we're going to contribute effectively to just peace as members of the ecumenical movement, is to try and move somehow beyond the limitations that exist in our society. In the past 20 years, I think one of the most helpful works that I have studied and reflected on has been moving beyond sectarianism, the work of Joel Leakey and Cecilia Clegg. For me, it has been instructive and helpful. And one of the big insights I brought away with me from my reading of Moving Beyond Sectarianism was that we can be sectarian. You and I can be sectarian, even when not intentionally and consciously choosing so to be. I may not intend to leave others out, or to exclude them, or to belittle them. But if they end up feeling left out and feeling excluded and feeling belittled, the result is sectarian, even if the intention wasn't. That is where we, along with everybody else, have to look at our attitudes and actions with the help of others who can see maybe what is invisible to us. And two little vignettes that I found helpful in this area is a Catholic priest friend of mine said to me a few years ago, he went into the foyer of the school in which he was working and he saw the portrait of the Pope on the wall. And the first thought that came to his mind was, if I was a Protestant or Unionist coming in here and seeing this on the wall, what would be my first reaction? Would this help me to feel welcome? Maybe the portrait should be hanging on the wall, but maybe kind of more at the heart of the school, not at the front. I was at a Church of Ireland ordination ceremony there a few years ago, and there was a screen on the church which we could read the words of the readings and the words of the hymns. And there was a photograph of the church and of the church tower taken a few months earlier when the Union flag was flying on it. The clergyman beside me, somebody I know to be a very committed unionist, said to me, Tom, I'm a great admirer of the national flag, but actually I don't think it should be in the photo here today because that mightn't help everybody to feel welcome and to feel at ease. While we know that our issues in Ireland are more about identity, land and power than they are about religion, there's no denying that there is a religious dimension to them, and that has to be taken seriously. And I've found over the years that people who have worked abroad as missionaries have a keen sense of how strife in this country, especially when reported in the media, even if not fully accurately reported, can kind of lead to the undermining of confidence kind of in the Christian gospel and how it's proclaimed. My final point will be around the time we live in. The past 25 years has given us a wonderful opportunity because of the relative peace we have enjoyed. This has given us the opportunity to consolidate that peace and to address the issues of injustice in our society. But I think the danger is that we can take the current peace for granted, become complacent and smug, and neglect the duty to be vigilant in sustaining and deepening the current peace and the justice issues which have to be looked at. In the years of the Troubles, ecumenically minded believers were aware of the imperative to work for peace. It gave an urgency and a relevance to our ecumenical endeavors. Nowadays, there can be a false security that lulls us into an unhealthy passivity. The peace has to be worked at. It's a lot more than the absence of violence and the silence of gunfire. We have to deal with the deep anger in our society because of the experiences of exclusion and violence in the past, and the deep fears that are there because of an uncertain constitutional future and the implications that has for the national identities and allegiances of people. These angers and fears have to be identified and they have to be addressed. Otherwise, they will fester and the result will be corrosive. The parity of esteem between two main political traditions in Northern Ireland, which is at the heart, it takes time and patience. It also takes creativity, the willingness to think outside the box and to take risks. This is the opportunity and this is the challenge that we have at this present moment here in Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. So that concludes the opening round of contributions from our panelists. And if you like the way it's been structured, this has been the Christianity discredited round. And we're now heading more, well, some people might hope that we're heading towards Pilgrim's Progress in round two. My glamorous assistant, Jin, has asked me to remind the panel that 5 minutes is made up of 5 segments of each 60 seconds, and he's counting. So with that little subtle reminder in place, we move into the second round, and I'd ask Siobhan to lead off, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I do apologize for going over. I hate when people go over, and I did it. I apologize. I'll try to compensate here. The uncertain constitutional future that Father Tom Layden just mentioned, I think I'm going to make 2 points. The first is there's a lot of media and normative political talk about a border poll at the moment, and I think it's terrible. I think it's, again, it's a context thing. It's not a specifically theological thing I'm offering here. I think that United Ireland is inevitable, but not soon. So let us just let things take their course, because if we bounce people into constitutional certainty, it will be, and we will just have more of the same. It has come to an accommodation, possibly beyond my lifetime. Second point. I was going to go through things I said and come up with a solution. Wasted too much of your time actually outlining the problem. The solution, in short, is ritual agency. And I have heard in lots of things that people have said, echoes, implicit echoes, of the idea that we need to raise people, whether they're avowedly religious or not, with the ability to act in concert with others through the symbolization of their body. And this brings me to my last suggestion, which is about signaling. I learned a lot during COVID about, and I was really, really terrible at it at first, and I'm probably still terrible at it, but about how to communicate through a screen. I was one of those professors who didn't want anything online. I didn't want to mark online. I didn't want to talk online. And of course, I've been forced to learn how to do it. And I see that it has extraordinary graces within it. And one of them is signaling. And so I'm struck by a couple of things in reaction to what's been said. The first is that there's a sort of perverse opportunity in the fact that denominations are not where it's at in terms of people's identity anymore. A very conservative PCI, Presbyterian, will have a lot more in common in terms of their expression of values with a very conservative Catholic or Church of Ireland person than they will with people within their own denomination. And this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to surf values and notions of belonging, because of course the same is true of so-called liberal or progressive views, and get together. And yes, we're different. We may not normally meet. Like Gerald said, we may have been, as I was also growing up, taught absolutely never to meet with those people. But the cause and the political need to speak about values and the campaigns that matter to these groups in their different ways are doing a lot of the work for us if we could but just tap into it. And how that signaled, those of you who've read my book know I talk about a church in New York, and this is 20 years ago, and it's much more common now, a Catholic church in the village, who just had a rainbow flag on their door. And that's now quite a common thing. It wasn't then, or it wasn't, at least it wasn't in New York. So in an internet age, in a COVID screen time age, what can we do that would signal we do ecumenism here? We don't know how to do it. There's no script for it, but we want you. We want to expand the borders that are habitually set around us. It won't be a rainbow flag, but it could be something. It could be the Robert Balla image of a dove that we have in our building. Probably not. We probably need something else. But it shouldn't be too hard to come up with a symbol that says, if you come here, you're wanted. And that could be coming here online. It doesn't, because lots of us can't attend physical worship for all sorts of reasons. When we can have the sign out front under the name of the church. But it might help us to think, what would be the equivalent of the rainbow flag to say, if you're LGBTQ, you're welcome here. We're an all-inclusive church. What would that be for those of us who, to use Robin's phrase, want koinonia?
Thank you very much, Siobhan. That was a wonderfully hopeful note on which we concluded that contribution. We move next to Nicola for her second contribution.
Thanks, Andrew. So I will pick up where I left off, which is also an area that was referenced by a number of other speakers around the building capacity at the local level. And so some of my thoughts on that are, first of all, just the importance of being intentional about the fact that the work of peace and reconciliation belongs at the heart of the life and mission of the church, and the contribution of the work of ecumenism, Christian unity, interchurch relations, whatever you want to call it, to that work of peace and reconciliation. And there are lots of ways in which we can do this. We don't have to think too hard for scripture references that provide opportunities in preaching in terms of other activities within the church, creating space for dialogue and for reflection. I think there's a lot of scope for work to be done around the general area of training. So whether that's as a congregation, making space for training around listening and dialogue, training around dealing with diversity. The whole area of training for ministry is one that I think requires a lot of attention, because there just aren't enough opportunities for ecumenical encounter as part of that. And I think it's just a huge missed opportunity. And there's also not enough opportunity to really get hands-on experience around the challenges of peace building before people are sent out to work in the context of a very divided community. I think we can also think outside the box in terms of all the different types of training that people are undertaking in a church context, and creating more opportunities to do that ecumenically. So whether it's around youth work, safeguarding, supporting families, all of these kind of things, there are much more opportunities there to do these kind of things ecumenically and to really contextualize them in terms of the challenges that we see in a divided society. And then lastly, on the training point, the whole area of continuous professional development is one in which people who are in positions of leadership in our church, whether clergy or lay, just don't get enough opportunity to avail of those kinds of supports. They really need them. One of the areas that has come up time and time again in my work is the whole area of mental health. And there are lots of other examples. And then generally in terms of investment, so the amount of time that we invest in this work, making it part of people's jobs and job descriptions, but also the headings in the budget are a statement about priorities. And if the work of peace and reconciliation and building interchurch relations doesn't feature there, then that says something. On the wider question of leadership, churches are called to promote a model of servant leadership, which when it's done well should create this space for collaboration where people are able to make the best of their gifts and talents. But when we don't pay sufficient attention to relationships, as other speakers have alluded to, we don't build up the trust that allows for that real collaboration. And so instead, what we see is a lot of work falling on a very small number of individuals. And I think as we look around our churches, we can all point to examples of people who are doing really inspirational work in the area of peace and reconciliation. But we haven't done enough to build up the networks that will support those people. So we see excessive demands on individuals as a pervasive problem, but also an excessive reliance. So when that person moves on, the work collapses. I have a number of recommendations around listening. I think, first of all, picking up on a point I made earlier about listening to young people, which is a real challenge, really listening, giving them the floor, listening to why they feel alienated and disillusioned from church, but also listening to the really hard things they have to say about how and why they have become disillusioned with the Good Friday Agreement, with the peace process, and with politics. And basically, in a nutshell, it's because they don't see them delivering a better society. And there are challenges there that are not being heard in our churches. Having the courage to listen to the victims and survivors of violence, those who've lost their loved ones. Too often we are just uncomfortable with their pain and we don't really create the spaces to hear it. And this not only holds us back from doing the deep work of healing as a society, but it keeps our commitment to peace on a superficial level. We could recognise more clearly the link between the anti-poverty work that is done in churches and the challenge of peace and reconciliation, and the way that the socioeconomic divide exacerbates the tensions in society and puts further obstacles in the way of peace and reconciliation. On the other side of all of that, we need to really celebrate the achievements of peace, because too often we take it for granted and we fail to reflect on just how far we've come and by extension how much we've got to lose. And lastly, then, something that we did a few years ago in the Irish Interchurch meeting was to have a session where we reflected on church in a changing public square, and that was about thinking about how the church communicates. And the question wasn't how do we communicate more, because it wasn't about more churchy sounding noise out there, but how we communicate more effectively in terms of connecting with people. And one of the big themes coming out of that was the need for the churches to stop complaining about a lack of religious literacy in the wider society, and to start thinking more in terms of how churches could build up a mutual literacy with a range of different audiences, where there's a space in which faith can be appreciated and respected, but can be in a dialogue with others coming from a place of humility and reflection.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Now I'm going to keep to the correct running order this time. So Tim, you're on and you're muted. So come and talk to us.
Moving on from a rather negative first contribution, hopefully more positive now. Word that has been used is a church as a symbol. What can we have as a symbol? I think we symbolize continuity, rootedness and timeless truth in a very fluid and uncertain society. We're here in communities up and down the land. And in some ways, if we try and change too much, we stop being that continuity. We become just another noise in a noisy society. So that theology, that symbol of being here, of presence, preferably with a door that is open for people to come in at any time. A church that is always welcoming, not judgmental, doesn't ask people questions, doesn't ask them to sign on the dotted line. That is enormously encouraging to many, many people. The church, I think, has a pastoral strength. It gets to know people. People within the congregation get to know each other, support each other. The church isn't here to be academic. It has that had its place. It shouldn't be preachy, preaching at people, rather getting alongside them at important times of their lives, weddings, funerals, and sharing a blessing. I know that many, whenever I have a mixed marriage to take, I always insist that the other clergy are invited and we share out the service, but I always insist on having a joint blessing. So either through a number once, we had a Presbyterian, a Catholic, and myself, and we gave the blessing together simultaneously, and that was a powerful symbol. I think the church has a sense of community. That is a flip side, and a very positive flip side of parochialism, and that's of increasing importance at a time of loneliness. The accusation that the church can sometimes be lukewarm, a bit too comfortable, that has the advantage that it doesn't really scare people off. And it can sometimes even attract them because they can feel comfortable and challenged at the same time. The church tries, with mixed success, to be multi-generational. And that is almost unique in our society. And that, I think, is a great plus, especially when it works. And I think it's easier for that to work in large parishes and in the rural areas. And again, I've criticized the sort of too much variety. You've got your traditional churches, you've got your conservative churches, and so on and so forth. But it does at least give people the opportunity to find the church which communicates best with them, find the church that in which they can find God. And that is partly cultural. And I think we need to allow for that. There's no point in going to a church if its style doesn't scratch where you itch. The church, as the opening verse of the book of Hebrews says, can be a messenger of grace in many and varied ways. And I think when we work, when we are effectively being church, I think we do that. And so as a parish priest in a commuter village, I can see both strengths and weaknesses at a local level. And sometimes it's very hard to separate the two out.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim. And now we proceed to Cheryl.
Thank you. I'll keep to my 5 this time. The kingdom of God is like a teaspoonful of yeast. It's a tiny little thing, and it's powerful. And it's most powerful when it's all mixed up and mixed into the rest of society. It's no use at all when it all sticks together. It has to be kneaded in. So there's an uncomfortable process that needs to be done for the yeast of the kingdom of God to be kneaded right throughout society. And I was at a conference recently run by the Presbyterian Church around education, and it struck me just how many people who love God are involved in the world of education at every level. The lollipop people, the dinner ladies, probably. There might be some dinner men, teachers, head teachers, governors, all the rest, and also in the civil service. And it struck me that sometimes as churches, as structural churches, we focus so much on our power and our control as organizations and what we're trying to do as organizations that we forget that our true power is in the real people. And the real people are already out there doing real relationships. And I think the same applies to all of our ecumenical endeavors, that the power is in every individual to build their relationships across whatever connections they have in their work, in their sports, in their local village, wherever you are, whatever it is you do. That's my pre-point, is leaven. We're leaven. And so the opportunities for us are that the gospel compels us to love each other. So we have authority, never mind what we're told from our pulpits, never mind what gatekeepers tell us we can't do. We are authorized and commanded to go and love each other and to love our enemies. So let's get on with it and enjoy it. The relative weakness of the church at the moment is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to humble ourselves. It's an opportunity for us to pool our resources. It's an opportunity for us to look at fresh ways of doing things. I was talking with somebody from a different denomination, discussing the possibility of what would happen if we had an ecumenical faculty that oversaw all the teacher training. Like, I've got nothing to do with education apart from the fact I'm in a university, but it was an interesting conversation to be having, because my father was a Bible college principal, and in the 80s he was trying to get different theological faculties and Bible colleges to pool resources so that everybody wasn't teaching the same little tiny bunches of students the same things, when they could have brought them together and had them learn together and learn from each other and educate each other, and have had a much bigger view of God and of the gospel at the end. If we would dare to believe that our institutions are not going to suffer by doing stuff together, but that our institutions will actually be enhanced, and everybody will be enhanced, and the whole church and society will be enhanced by us pooling our resources and relying on the quality of good relationships rather than structures of power and control. The immense need that we're facing at the moment of the world for justice, and particularly climate justice, is also a great opportunity for us to get over ourselves, to remove the luxury of seeing ourselves as separate from each other, and to look at this tiny planet whirling around the galaxies and, have a look at the Webb telescope pictures of the vastness of the universe and think, what are we really about here? What are we trying to do, reinforcing our little empires in our local institutions? Can we not see that our God is so much greater, and invest courageously in life-giving stuff, and invest courageously in supporting each other, so that instead of having lots of separate aid agencies, maybe our aid agencies, they probably already do a whole lot more collaboration than I know, but they have to exist separately so that the different sectors can contribute, and we can maximize the money. But let's think about how we can do relationships in a way that's not about building walls, but is about building the life-giving kingdom of God. And my final little point: if invisible viruses can change the world, do I need to say the rest? If invisible viruses can change the world, surely the love of God is more powerful. Can we have a contagious ecumenism that goes past our masks and our social distancing and takes over the world for good? Bless you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I sense another thought for the day coming on there. We move now to our final contributor in the round of these first formal input sessions, and that's back to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So 5 minutes and 3 challenges. The first challenge, I think, is to use the time well, to use the time with imagination and with creativity. This time in which we're living, post-Brexit, post-COVID, post the Good Friday Agreement, with all the frustrations that attend the fact that it's not being fully implemented. But this is the moment in history in which we find ourselves, and we have an opportunity of moving forward. I would suggest a good way of doing this would be to engage with those in the arts, with those who are in theatre, cinema, music, painting, all the various expressions of art. Many of us will have seen the film Belfast recently, and it recreates that summer of 1969, that summer kind of when the Troubles happened. And I think it's helpful for us to be brought back to the troubled years, just to be reminded of the awfulness of that time and how it's important not to return to it. But I think it's also important to enlist our imagination so that with the help of the arts, we can see how things could be in our world, in our society, if only we could regard those who are different to us as a gift rather than a threat. They are assets in our lives. Living well in the time can be done by drawing on the experiences of persons in mixed marriages to learn from their lived reality about how mutuality and reciprocity can grow. And also to draw on the experience of those who have lived and worked in other shared spaces, those who have worked in common workplaces, those who've been involved in twinning between churches, between schools, those who have participated in cross-community links, those who've been involved in shared education, in integrated education, and in many other different contexts. Because in discussion with them, we discovered that progress is possible and can be achieved, but not without effort. My second challenge is in terms of the need to come to terms with the legacy of the past in all its complexity. If we don't, it will keep coming back to haunt us and to divide us. We need to be able to deal more creatively with the complex legacy of our troubled past. We need to find some way in which everyone will be enabled to tell their story, in which the truth will emerge. A forum where people can come and say what happened as they experienced it, and where we in the wider society could have a more accurate sense of what occurred, where people who are innocent and wrongly accused can have their good name restored. And also we have to think of perpetrators, because often those who are perpetrators of the Troubles, whether they were working for a state or for other organizations, were people who would never broken the law in any other context, could never have spent a day in prison, but they were caught up in the particular situation. And often they were doing things because they were asked to do them by other people. So I think we have to find a creative way of doing this. And I think we in the churches have an advantage that now we meet in theological discussion. Occasionally there can be theological disagreement. But back in the 16th and 17th centuries, when we disagreed, we killed each other. Maybe church people didn't kill other church people, but our various state and political representatives killed people from the other side, just to kind of make it very clear where the truth stood. So we've had to deal with a difficult history ourselves in ecumenism, in moving from conflict to dialogue over the years. And maybe we would have something to bring. And I would ask us, can we engage with our own common Christian tradition, which has a lot to say about justice, mercy, forgiveness, truth, new beginnings, healing. This will demand sensitivity, respect, a process that works and is suitable for our kind of society. And challenge number 3, this is about having the right attitude in mind and approach as we in the ecumenical movement discern how we can best serve the just peace in this moment of our history. It calls for an attitude of hospitality and welcome. And on a more theological note, I would suggest that here a great help would be a renewed theology of church, a renewed theology of Christian community, which would emphasize our role as churches as servants of the missio Dei, as servants of the mission of God. God's mission in the world is at the heart of what the church is about. God is at work in history, and we are invited to work along with God, to cooperate with God. We are called to serve God's mission and not to follow our own agenda. And I think that would give us a much bigger perspective and a much broader context. This service would involve being humble and repentant and acknowledging our contribution as churches in the complex situation that emerged in the early 20th century in this country, and that mistakes were made and that we sometimes were implicated in those mistakes. The churches have always wanted to stay very close to their people, and especially in troubled times. And this has been something very good. We still want and need to do this, but there is the further call to a healthy critical distance from the traditions we have inherited. A critical distance enables us to acknowledge what is good and noble in our traditions, and also what is less good and less noble. And hopefully we'll be able to find the time and energy to bring this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Tom. Well, that's the first two rounds. The third dedicated round is intended to give people who are watching and listening and who might have questions that they want to bring to the panel to do precisely that. So as Jin asked you before, if you have questions that you would like to bring forward into the discussion, please would you enter them into the chat, because that is the way we're going to be checking on questions and referring them around the place. And I also have the pleasure of inviting the panelists themselves, that if there's something that they would like to raise or to affirm or to raise a question about in what's been said by their fellow panelists, they are also free so to do, so that we get a degree of interaction amongst the panelists. One of the first chats, from the first questions that has come in, comes from Gay Brocklesby. Thank you, Gay. Please ask the speakers how the traditional churches can make a welcoming space for incoming religious groups, especially those who were majorities in their originating countries. What do the speakers feel they have in common with the practicing and believing Muslim or Ukrainian or Russian Orthodox Christian, both of which are now displaced from the home place in which they felt comfortable? Because, and only because, Tom, you used the word hospitality, I'm going to go to you first to address those questions about the ecumenical response of imagining a more hospitable country. And then I may go to Siobhan, who I know has been writing something on attitudes to home, and then I'll go around the panel. But we'll take this question first.
Two words that come to mind for me in terms of welcoming people coming to the country from other religious traditions would be space and time. Often people need physical space in which they can meet and worship. We in the churches where we have space to be willing to share that space. Space isn't just for us, it's for all of God's people and all those who are searching for truth. So to share space and then to share time, to give time to listen to those who've arrived, to hear their story. They can share with us photographs of what it was like for them in the old country, tell us their stories, and we can tell them something about ourselves. I think this will work where good quality relationships get established. And for good quality relationships, there has to be investment, there has to be time. One of the curses in our own society, as it is currently structured, is that so much of our living is in silos, and people often are very busy in their own denomination, get very involved in it. But I think there's always a call just to open the door, the physical door of buildings, but also the door of our hearts, and to give people time and space, and also in certain circumstances to give them money if that's also what they need. But above all, an attitude of hospitality, of welcome. These are all our sisters and brothers. We're all daughters and sons of the one God, however we conceive God to be.
Siobhan, can I invite you to comment on this question?
In addition to everything that Tom has said, with which I agree, I think the disposition is toward listening. That's the main thing. And curiosity, and the question, what do you need? And the sharing of what we have, to my mind, would come later, because it's only by listening really, really well and for a long time that we will. These are very, very, very traumatized people. And it's a privilege to be in the position of receiving, and to remember that, and to just listen. And because of my predilection to symbolization, to encourage them to symbolize in whatever ways are needed right now, what they need, acknowledging that later other things may be needed. But it's a particular moment of trauma, and I think our role is one of bearing witness, being present, and not by putting any words on it, but by listening.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Would any other speaker like to come in on this? Yes, I see Nicola.
So in Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, one of the ways in which we're responding is to promote the Church of Sanctuary movement. So again, that brings the whole signalling piece that Siobhan was talking about previously by, you know, signing up to be a Church of Sanctuary. You're sending that message that people are welcome. It is very much about listening. And for us, that work goes hand in hand with our interfaith dialogue, because it's really important that churches understand that this is not about converting people, but at the same time, there's also some recent reflection that the Irish churches have been doing around the difference between welcome and belonging that I think is relevant here, that sometimes we can find it easy to say, you stranger are welcome here, but for people to make the space for people to really feel that they belong costs us a bit more. So very often we stop at the welcome piece, but people can be in our churches for a long time and still feel like the outsiders. So that's an area that needs a bit more focus and attention.
Thank you. And Cheryl,
They have lots of people who come from lots of places. There would be a number of students, I think, that would come primarily because it's an opportunity to get a visa. That's a way of getting a visa to get here, in the hope of getting a qualification and getting work later on. So the study is almost secondary for some of them, and that creates all manner of problems. But what I would say is that for many of us, we're not encountering these people face to face in the first instance. What we might be encountering is the dog walker in the park who is saying, well, I would kick all those Arabs out, you know, and daring to be the person who disagrees, I think is quite hard. I don't think we are very good at challenging very confident assertions of hostility. And I think we do need to, and maybe some more of us need to have the courage to go on to places like the Nolan Show and hold a space for alternative views that are kinder and that help people to engage more compassionately with the possibility that the other is also like us. So, you know, when they say, well, I would kick them all out, you say, well, do you think we should bring back all the people that ever left Ireland? You know, or should we bring back, you know, to help people to see the inconsistency in the very approach of hostility that there is. But I'm encountering as my informal job of chaplain to dog walkers in my local park, you know, that's an important piece of work of just being leaven and just challenging views, because there's so many people living in these silos where you're only hearing echo chambers. They're only hearing the views of the people that they hang around with. And we need to dare to go into those places and bring another view and create space for compassion, for otherness. And I just think that's gospel stuff. I mean, it doesn't matter whether the otherness comes from the other part of the planet. For us in university, it's about making sure that there's proper prayer space for Muslims, for example, even though that impinges on us in terms of our chaplaincy space, and it's complicated, and we have to, you know, there's a price to be paid, but we're willing to pay it in order to build relationships, and then to recognize that they're not all the same, whoever they are. So you can't expect that all the Muslims are going to be comfortable with whatever provision is made for Muslims, because some of them will prefer to come to Christian chaplains than to hang out with other Muslims, because the world is diverse and complicated, and we need to not package them all in one size and say, well, that's the other, and we're going to welcome the other, as if the other is a homogeneous group.
Thanks, Cheryl. I want to go to you finally, Tim, because you mentioned the importance of making sure churches are open to all comers. So how do you think this openness and hospitality should be tailored specifically towards migrants arriving into the country?
Very simply, there is an open door physically for people to come in. When they do come in, they may sit for quiet, they may meet with a member of the congregation, they may meet with the clergy, but there is listening, which Siobhan very much mentioned. I think is important. Listen to their questions, give them time, not being patronizing, not we're the host, you are the supplicants, not from above, because that can be very it could just be very unattractive to people. But just that open door without conditions. What are your needs? What do you want? And let's work together to find answers to your immediate needs and your long-term needs. But it needs to be alongside, never from above. And that can be quite difficult when we are the dominant society.
Thank you, Tim. One of the observations came in following Cheryl's input to affirm what she had said about the, if you like, the pedagogical challenges for those involved in public witness and worship for the churches. So I think in terms of the kinds of agenda that everybody has been talking about, in terms of charting something that is more Pilgrim's Progress than falling into discredit, can I ask the panelists to identify, if you like, one item that they would want to prioritize in the syllabuses for those who are engaging in training and preparation for further ministry? What is the, or you can have more than one, but what would you see as topping your agenda pedagogically that is necessary or that is missing? Who wants to have a go at that? Yes, Siobhan.
I want to pick up on something that Nicola said, which is there's a missed opportunity to train together. So I would argue not for a particular thing to be highlighted or newly included on the syllabus, but to have a lot more encounter. As a person who was raised Catholic in a very sectarian society, I came and was not intended, you know, no one's ever paid for my theological education. No one wanted it. Within my own church, I've been trained, I was trained in Protestant circumstances for my BA and MA, which were profoundly important to me. And so I would just like to put a vote in for theologically educating people together. Yes, they may need to stave off to do particular things, but it's not about the syllabus, it's about being in the room together.
Thank you, Siobhan. So that's a plea for ecumenical form, whatever about the content. Cheryl.
To back up what Siobhan's saying, I think that picking on one subject or one pet theme would be far too narrow for the diversity of the people involved, but putting people together in the room and giving them the chance to unpack whatever unpacks as they encounter each other. You know, whether it's studying New Testament together and discovering how much we share in common and how much, you know, how much richness there is in each other's tradition, or how much poverty there might be in mine. You know, all of that comes together. And so I think Siobhan's got the nail on the head. If we could get people to learn together, and if we could be less afraid of pulling those resources, there'd be so much to do. I think saints and scholars from Ireland, you know, there could be a whole new swathe of people going out from Ireland if we could organize ourselves to learn together. And you know, we bring so many different perspectives of empire from on above and below, of people, immigrants and coming back, and both sides of power. I just think we've got a lot to carry together and to bring to the text.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Yes.
Well, unsurprisingly, I'm going to add my vote to that as well. The only thing I would add is that I think part of the benefit of that encounter is overcoming fear, and fear is such a barrier. And I think, you know, sometimes we think about the fear of the other and people being afraid of being put in situations that are compromising for them in terms of theology and ecclesiology. But more often than not, the fear that I encounter is holding people back is just the ignorance of the other, and people genuinely afraid of offending people. And they're so afraid of offending people and causing hurt and causing embarrassment that they'd sooner not have the conversations. So I think that's what you help to break down by giving people those spaces at the earliest opportunity, and then lots of repeated opportunities.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Tom, you do a great deal of cross-community educational work and talking to mixed groupings. What do you think on this?
One thing that was going through my mind when the question was posed was something around process, that the people who come to these courses, that we'd find some way of sharing with them a way in which they can reflect on experience, reflect on scripture, and share it with each other. And it could be that at the end of the week or at the end of 2 weeks, that they would gather maybe with the lecturer, and there would be a time of reflection, and people would be asked to gather, well, what are the learnings? What are the fruits of our learning? And just share that with each other in a way in which there would be deep listening, in which people aren't afraid of making a mistake, in which they're not going to be challenged straight away, to create some kind of a safe environment in which people learn how to discern kind of what God says to us through the word of scripture and through the experiences of human life, and what God says to us through our fellow students and through the people with whom we work. So a process of reflection that would be effective, listening, gentle, and respectful. I think if that could be included, that could be very, very helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tom. We've got one question that has come in, and that is tremendously precise in terms of what it's asking us. So what of the role of social media as a communication platform for ecumenical Christian dialogue? So this is for anyone who is ecumenical on Twitter, or is very often social. Yeah, go for it,
I'll
Sarah.
say the same thing I've been saying all along. Different people will do this in different ways, but I do think that having lots of input from different places, whether in our social media groups, and hearing different voices rather than only listening to people from one place, is going to be better for our understanding of the world, and is going to inform how we engage with our neighbor. And so, but obviously some people are just not going to do Facebook, so, and I don't do TikTok. Does anybody else? I think probably in this group, we've got some work to do on Instagram and TikTok, but but that will evolve. And hopefully the next generations will teach us if we do what Nicola said and listen more intentionally to the younger generations.
Are there other observations? Does anyone have an in with Mr. Putin and his ecumenical robots to advance the cause? Siobhan?
No, the question changed. I don't have that. I really enjoy things on social media which are non-explicitly ecumenical, and I think there's huge scope for that. So I'm thinking of Unvirtuous Abbey, check it out, or Ship of Fools, and these sites that make you laugh. And then you realize, oh, that's come from a Russian Orthodox guy. I didn't think I liked them. Or, oh, that's come from the really conservative, people I met in Liverpool. Didn't think I liked them. And it's made me laugh, and it's got me going. And they're not explicitly World Council of Churches, National Council of Churches, Irish Overcoming Sectarian sites. And so it's not a full answer to the question. It doesn't pretend to be, but it is to say there are spaces on social media that are doing this work at a global level or an Anglophone global level, which is not global at all and shouldn't be, but which we could tap into for resourcement in what we then might come up with here.
Thank you very much. Do other panelists want to add their voice at this stage? No, I don't see anybody putting their hand up. I'm afraid the time is running short, and I've been asked at this particular point in the enterprise to hand back to Jin, who has some organizational matters to bring to your attention.
Thank you, Andrew. Let me just share my screen. So this is about our next webinar. So our next webinar will be on the 2nd of June this year at the same time at 5 p.m. And the theme will be on eco-justice and peace on the island of Ireland and beyond, which will be chaired by Gillian Kingston, Irish School of Ecumenics Trust Steering Committee. So I hope that I'll see you all there in June. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jen. Cheryl.
May I just point to a little link that I put over in the chat, which is for Irish Church's Creation Care Conference next Friday. I'm not running it, but Stephen True, that's got it running, is an absolute force of nature in terms of getting people to disinvest from fossil fuels and so on. And I think it's a thing, it's worth going.
Excellent. Siobhan also has a thing.
Andrew, if this is not appropriate, I completely understand, but you're a professor of ecumenics. Would you please, if you can, share your thoughts on what we've been talking about? It's not right that you just get to be a gracious host for all of us. You know more about this than almost anyone on this island, and you've not been asked what you think. I would really love you to share any or all of what you think, please.
Excellent. In 2 minutes, I would thank you very much. It's lovely to get a nice, kind invitation like that from one's line manager. It's always lovely to have. What I was going to do in terms of synopsizing where I found the discussion would be to say something of what I have heard, and which is probably therefore reflecting some of my own biases around the questions that we've been listening to. Because it seems to me that one of the things that makes ecumenism happen, wherever it happens and at whatever level it's happening at, is it begins where Christian disunity hurts, or where it causes suffering, or where it begins to grate on people's experience and disadvantages them. And people then set out to change it. So there is an experience of pain, and there's also an experience of agency brought into being, which becomes an ecumenical movement. And I think listening to tonight's discussion, I've been hearing, if you like, evidence that could be advanced for either sides of what Robin offered us in the title of his book about there are things that discredit us. There are also things that possibly invite closer attention, and that we've all been able to identify some of these. Amongst our problems, it was put very dramatically, I think, by Tom. None of us has clean hands. And one of the tragedies, I suppose, is that in some areas we're not actually hearing effective repentance being articulated. There is a concern now with ecclesial repentance. And one of the things that's throwing up at a theological level is that churches find it very hard to do. For whatever reason, we have a great vocabulary around sin and repentance, but turning our practice into shaping something is where we begin to run into difficulties. So many things have been left undone, has been said. There has been such lack of listening. And one of the things that I suppose it's John Henry Newman who said, great ideas take time, and finding time for something around peace and unity requires a great deal of time. And we have a great deal of disconnection with the concerns of so many people, that a lot of what we say is not creating any kind of echo when we throw the coin in the well. One of the phrases that Siobhan used was, denominationality is not where it's at. And I agree, but the problem on this funny little island is that denominationality, we live up to our necks in it. And it's an extra, yes, Cheryl is sporting a particularly lovely fashion accessory there to demonstrate the metaphor. We have a great deal of denominationality. We have quite literally a cradle to the grave service of denominationality. And we kind of think that's normal, and we kind of think that's what Christianity is. And it's probably worth thinking of, I think, Richard Niebuhr, who said denominationalism represents the moral failure of Christianity. It's not just Christianity, it's Christianity gone wrong. So what is the ecumenical alternative? And how do we shape it? We've heard some of it coming through in what we're listening here, and it's to do with matters of pedagogy supremely, of bringing people together, cultivating those relationships, doing relationships, Cheryl said, keeping our churches open to a variety of experience, as Tim said, and finding ways that, Tom said, you know, our big questions are around identity, land, and power. Well, maybe there are ways in which we can add our little leaven to those discussions around identity, land, and power in ways that might loosen the way that these questions have so often bound people up and caught them up and crushed them in all sorts of imperfect identities that have left us not particularly comfortable at the end. So off we go to do relationships. I must thank Jin for once again being supremely helpful in organizing this event. I want to thank our panelists, Siobhan, Nicola, Tim, Cheryl, Tom. Thank you so much. It's been very stimulating. I'm listening to and I'm watching, as I'm sure we all are, seeing all sorts of very positive messages coming in. So hopefully this is energizing a discussion that's not going to end when we press the leave button tonight, but will continue on and energize people further. Thank you so very much.